Welcome back again this week to an analysis behind the news. I want to thank everybody that was involved in the Seattle Council dinner that we had this last weekend in Seattle. It was a lot of fun, and I think everybody enjoyed themselves, got reports, heard various things relative to Common Core, updates, and that sort of business. So it was good to see old friends as well. One of the things that I want to talk about is far more diverse than people understand when they first look at it. There's a lot more involved, a lot of things that are coming together that indicate that we're going to be going into a phase in this country that we went into in the 1960s and the 1970s relative to violence in the streets. The violence in the streets in the 1960s and 70s, most people think were confined to civil rights issues. While this was true to a degree, there was also at the same time anti-war issues that were in the streets. But in addition, there were a number of separatist movements within the United States that fueled a lot of the problems that some of our local governments experienced. There was the American Indian movement and things of that nature that were communist-led, and they created a real problem, particularly in the state of New Mexico, for local authorities. And this we are beginning to see happening again. You see, because what we are seeing in the Fergusons, in the Baltimores, that sort of thing, are signs, they are portent of things to come. Our own government has been involved in catering to certain minorities, sects, blocks, etc., and getting them agitated to a position of going out into the streets and promoting violence, creating violence, so on and so forth, to the detriment of local authorities. Now that they're starting to do this, and there are other things involved as well, we see this morning the Obama administration, in an executive order, come out and say they're not going to send certain military equipment any longer to local police. Now, libertarians will see that as a victory, but the people on the streets will not. You see, you've got to put yourself in the position of a local policeman. We in the John Birch Society have a program of support your local police and keep them independent. We as well have been concerned about the influx of military equipment into our local community from the federal government due to the strings that are attached to it and the training and other things from the federal government. But nonetheless, if you put yourself in the shoes of a policeman today, what's coming down the road, what's been happening recently, necessitates much of this equipment, whether you like it or not. And my family's been involved in law enforcement. I've had very close relationships with law enforcement over the years. And believe me, the difference between law enforcement in the 1960s and law enforcement today is radically different. The police are forced to do things they could not nor would do in the 1960s that infuriate the local citizenry. But that is up to the legislature, not up to the local police. They're simply enforcing the law. Take your grievance up with the legislature. Take your grievance up with the Congress. But in the drug situation that we see today, in the militancy of cartels that are attached to drugs, with a rising militancy of communist cadres within the inner cities, whipping up people into the streets to do harm to the police, they need equipment that will protect them in the performance of their duties, whether we like it or not. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that we have a policeman with a billy club on the corner when a cartel guy down the street's got an AK-47. It doesn't make any sense. We've got to be able to have our local police be able to maintain local law and order under the leadership of local citizens through their city councils, etc. And that's where we stand. It isn't the equipment itself. It's the strings that come with the equipment that we don't like. Now that the situation is deteriorating and has been fomented a great deal by our own government now is going to deprive the local police the ability to protect themselves. This will become an overwhelming situation in certain cities. As this occurs, then the federal government can come in and say, well, see, the local government, the local citizens, the local police can't handle the situation. Big Brother is going to have to come in and do something about it. So they create the condition, create the problem, they kind of give a solution and then take that solution away later on in the way of equipment. In addition to that, what we are starting to see behind the scenes excuse me, is the fact that Russia and China are getting involved. Just this last summer, separatist movements went to Russia in various conferences with the Russian government. Well, they don't call it the Russian government, but everything's the Russian government there. And they are promoting the idea of the separatist movement in Texas and that sort of thing, just like they did before with the separatist movement in New Mexico, so on and so forth. The Chinese are now threatening to arm the separatist movements in Hawaii, for instance. Now, these little things, you don't notice them much in your newspaper. Probably sometimes the only place you'd ever find out about them would be in our magazine, The New American. But they're serious things. It doesn't take very many people to create a situation that can be utilized as a crisis for the federal government to step in. A half a dozen people armed with automatic weapons on the streets of any city in our country, and you've got a crisis. And then that's elevated more in the media and hyped up until finally people are demanding that something to be done about it. A half a dozen people in the streets of New York with AK-47s could mow down hundreds of people within minutes. And then we've got major headlines. So these things can happen. And it's not Muslims, it's not this or that, or blacks or Somalis or anything else, but it is the fact that these people are being trained and promoted and agitated by not only our own government, but outside factors from China and Russia. Now, the thing is that we have another problem in connected with this, and that's immigration. And so we see immigrants coming into this country, some of them being flown in by our own government from places like Iraq, Somalia, Syria, and that sort of thing, because they're the moderate rebels. They're the moderate extremists. They're the moderate whatever, warlords or whatever it happens to be. And yet these are all individuals that were raised in a society of violence. They don't have an appreciation of what we know as liberty. We know that some of them are being infiltrated in, and we also know that arms are being infiltrated across the southern border because we've seen them interdicted. So what we're saying is this all ties together, whether it's immigration, whether it's federal policy relative to civil rights and a number of other things like that, whether it's violence in the streets organized by the communists in that community, because we've seen all the placards, haven't we? That the placards tell you to go to websites which are the Communist Party USA, that kind of thing. And so all of this is starting to come together. The portent of violence in our communities is all there for you to see if you just look around you. In addition to that, and we've reported on the close ties now between China and Pakistan, what we're seeing too is China and India are strengthening their military ties. And this is out of the Financial Times. You didn't read about this in your local newspaper. But what does that have anything to do with the subject at hand? Because China all over the world is surrounding the United States in one fashion or another. Here's Beijing to unveil South America investments. So what they're doing is they're having more influence in Latin America, and that influence is starting to percolate up over our border. And so that ties into all of this. So as you look at this whole thing, it's not different problems. It's all one problem that's coming together, and it does not bode well for the streets of the United States, not just this summer, but in the years to come, unless we support our local police and keep them independent as only one aspect of the solution. Until next week, we'll see you then.